did Head 85. Can we talk for a minute? Good. Talk about Texas. Now, I wanted to do a video for the repeal the voter suppression law in Tennessee regarding the SB 14 law. So it's basically a question and answer. So basically, the first question. SB 14 is often called the Texas Voter ID Law, passed by the legislature and signed into law on May 27, 2011, by Texas Governor Rick Perry. SB 14 is in court because it is currently covered under the Voter Rights Act of 1965, as amended in 2006. It was amended to cover non-English speaking populations that, whose states only provided English voting materials at the polls, which brought Texas into its jurisdiction. Section 5 states that any changes in voter law in a state with a history of discrimination that has to be pre-cleared by the Department of Justice or a 3-judge panel in Washington, D.C. It was rejected for pre-clearance and the trial date expedited, so SB 14 could be in place for the November election if upheld. SB 14 requires photo ID at the polls, yet the kinds of ID are specified below. Prospective voters will need to provide 1 piece of primary identification, 2 pieces of secondary identification, or any piece of secondary identification plus 2 pieces of supporting identification in order to receive an EIC, or a unique voter ID card. Primary ID, found on page 3 of the ruling, says number 1 is an expired Texas driver's license or personal identification card that has been expired for at least 60 days, but not more than 2 years. A license to carry a concealed handgun, also issued by the Department of Public Safety. A U.S. military ID card, a U.S. citizenship certificate with photograph, or a U.S. passport. You can present these at the polls and automatically vote or obtain a free EIC to vote under SB 14. If you have none of these, you need the following to get a free election identification certificate, or EIC. A secondary identification is one of the following: an original or certified copy of a birth certificate, an original or certified copy of a court order indicating an official change of name, like married women, or gender, like transgender individuals. A court order indicating a change of name or gender costs $5 for the record search, plus $1 per page of the court order. A U.S. citizenship or naturalization papers without an identifiable photo. Everyone will need one of these forms. Okay, never mind. I already covered that. And when going over the costs, an original or certified birth certificate could cost you $22 to $30. U.S. citizenship or naturalization papers cost about $354. Actually obtaining the name or gender change costs $152. A Texan must file a registration with the county elections registrar, and it has the voter's name, date of birth, and a sworn affirmation of U.S. citizenship. This certificate is actually a paper postcard, has no photograph, but includes a voter's name, gender, year of birth, and a unique voter ID number. When presented at the polls, a voter registration certificate entitles the registrant to cast an in-person ballot. If the application is approved, the registrar delivers a voter registration certificate to the applicant, either in person or by U.S. mail. When presented at the polls, a voter registration certificate entitles the registrant to cast an in-person ballot. They are unaffected by SB 14. To their county DPS office. But 81 of 254 counties don't have consistent office hours and impedes the enforcement of SB 14. Georgia mandated in its voter ID laws that all counties will have to have a county office in Texas it's the DPS, that will be open consistent hours and make sure that it's covered in the state budget. This is one of the few ways that the Texas law might have been a little better. However, because it didn't contain such a provision, it served that the purpose of SB 14, as well as the restrictive ID classes of ID, remains to deprive Texas minorities of the right to vote. As of this writing, Texas House of Republican supermajority for 2013 was cut to the point where they're not impervious to Democrats anymore. SB 14 wasn't in place for the November 2012 elections, and therefore people only needed the ID card prior to SB 14 being enacted. What's next is the challenge from Alabama, Texas, Mississippi, and South Carolina, challenging the Voter Rights Act, which 5 counties of Florida are also covered under this jurisdiction. Let me also state Georgia, Virginia, and New Hampshire have voter ID laws that were okayed or pre-cleared by the DOJ. Obama also did win Virginia and New Hampshire. Also, Shelby versus Shelby versus Holder. Definitely, they are using Section 3 of the Voter Rights Act to basically stick it back to Texas. People can, but the kinds of ID necessary, like that of the Texas law, and others like that, are obscure pieces, like a gun permit, while making the ID a guessing game of validity or not, is why people are objecting to these kinds of laws. Next is the fact that there's no such thing as voter fraud happening. In order for this to really be effective, it must be on a huge scale. Smaller local elections may be turned by this, but something like a governor or presidential election cannot be swayed by a few people pretending to be another person. Yes, especially if you are in the groups most likely to vote Democratic, like students, minorities, elderly, union workers, just to name a few. These are the main people the Republicans are trying to stop from voting with these laws. This is an unprecedented attack on voters' rights and is only the latest in a series of attacks that started with stopping felons from voting. Well, 1, take revenge and vote for candidates that oppose this, as well as voting in all elections, local, state, and federal. This is an area where you have to do your due diligence and you will need to keep informed. Also, urging people to vote as well is important. Let them know that in 2000, 537 people made the difference between Al Gore and George W. Bush. And if we need to repeat this lesson again, it will be more expensive given the sharp right turn they've taken. You can also get people involved in watching local and state politics so that we can make progress and elect fair-minded people. When we are watching the elected officials, we can turn back laws like this. Thank you for letting me talk to you. See you later.